Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaur Bhakti Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So thank you very much. So the talk, as Prabhu mentioned, is called spiritual but not religious. So this is a very common phrase, especially in the West, because of certain historical reasons, and also because of certain cultural education which we're getting both directly and indirectly. So it leads to a kind of new concept of spiritual adherence called spiritual but not religious. So tonight we're going to unpack what does that phrase mean, what are its positive and negative implications, and we will understand what those two words mean as well in a more historical, philosophical sense. So it's very interesting. Is anyone here for the first time tonight? Welcome. What's your name? Asiana. Nice to meet you. Anybody else? Okay, so luckily you're in safe hands with these boys. So we're going to give you a very nice introductory level talk because we have different levels. So today's one is it's very good to get a basic understanding. Let me just open it up here. Where is it gone? Okay. So because in the modern age, we have a big paradox. We have a difficult situation that everyone is trying to look for happiness. But despite so many advancements, so many upgrades in technology, so much advancement in science, education, so many things, but people are becoming more and more dissatisfied. Because generally we see that there is a tendency for external advancement, but not for internal development. So we can see that is a big problem. And therefore, in the previous century, there was a strong emphasis on what you can call empirical world outlook. But now, in the postmodern world, there is a kind of resurgence again to some kind of notion of something spiritual. But at the same time, it's not like I'm Christian, I'm Muslim, I'm Jewish, I'm Hindu. But people know that only the external world, only the empirically observable, experienced world is not enough. Because generally we understand that the things we hold most dear to us, such as equality, such as love, such as consciousness, such as experiences, a lot of these things, they only have a value on the metaphysical platform. So we will discuss what does it mean that in the modern age people generally take up this term. Because it's very interesting. I have here a statistic for you. According to Pew Research Center. This was actually in 2017, so that was quite a while ago now. So the percentage is probably even larger. But it says that in 2017 to 2012 there was a big change in demographics of beliefs and faith. So 60% of people in 2012, they were saying we're religious and spiritual. And then after 10 years, that dropped by 1/4. So that's quite a big deal from 2012 to 2017 in 5 years. In the polls, and then it went from spiritual to religious, went up 30%. So spiritual but not religious. So that means now it's probably a little bit more than that even. Because that's the trend which is going on. So that means perhaps now 35-40% of Americans, they say I'm not religious but I am spiritual. And then 16 to 18, it went from 16% to 18%, neither religious nor spiritual. So a completely atheistic or anti-theistic or any other variety of those kind of similar ideologies has not really changed much over time. It's kind of steady. Maybe now it's a little bit more, maybe it's a quarter now of the US. And then religious but not spiritual, 6% said I'm religious but not spiritual. So I don't know what that means. Religious but not spiritual. I understand what spiritual but not religious means, but religious but not spiritual. Maybe they're like, I don't know. So that's what the statistics in this country are. So as you know, there are some countries which have a religious government. Mainly you only find that in the Middle East now, where it's an Islamic state government. Then most of Asia is generally secular. Even India, the biggest democracy in the world, although the majority of the people have some spiritual or religious alignment, it's a secular country, or many places. So in the US, there is not a specific state religion, but we know that in the foundational documents of this country, then the concept of God is part of the premise of the beliefs that started the country, such as equality. That's why it says we have unalienable rights endowed by the Creator, right? Is that the right word? I mean, I'm not American, so I've never read these things, but I just heard about them. And then on the coin, what does it say on the coin? Does anyone remember? In God we trust, right? So America, by its own foundation, by its own constitution, they presuppose, their concepts are based on a premise of God, because these were people generally from a Christian origin from Europe who came, and they wanted to start another kind of country where there was more liberty, because generally at that time in Europe, Christianity was a little bit more extremist. So if you were in France, there was a lot of fighting between Protestants and Catholics. So if you were on the wrong group, then you can be hung. Or if you were believing in pagan beliefs. Because those days Christian means those who are baptized and they accept the correct doctrine, right? So those who are not, they're considered pagans, so they used to also have so many forms of mistreatment. So because there were so many different denominations of Christianity, many people were happy to come here to have freedom to choose whatever they want to choose. Obviously now in Europe it's changed after a long amount of time. But we can see that there is a history, even in the US, even based on these statistics, that people are spiritually open, but they are also religiously cautious. Does that make sense? They're spiritually open, but they're religiously cautious. So when we use these terms, spiritual but not religious, it's good to know the history of these terms, right? Otherwise it can become confusing, right? Because some people, they will take them as synonyms. In one sense they can be used as synonyms, but what is being used in the New Age, postmodern sense, spiritual but not religious. So we will look at that a little bit. So the first thing with spiritual is, not even being spiritual, but the first thing with studying deeper truths is that's called philosophy, right? So therefore it's explained, one of my teachers explains, that even if you do not study philosophy, everyone has a philosophy. Because a philosophy means a way of life linking to what is your understanding of the universe, what is your understanding of the value of consciousness, what is your understanding of free will, for instance, people in America, everyone accepts the judicial system, right? Whether they want to or not, they have to accept. And generally people believe in the principle of it, because it's not too corrupt in this country. It's not too corrupt compared to if you go to Venezuela, Haiti or different places. Even in India. So in America it's not too corrupt that people still, they kind of respect it, right? The judicial system. So the judicial system only has value based on a philosophical belief. Otherwise it has zero value. That is a principle that people have free will, right? That's why you don't find dogs and cats in prison, right? Why don't you find dogs and cats in prison? Because a dog and cat is just acting based on impulses. So when a dog sees another dog, he will just bite. It's just natural. You don't blame them. Oh, this is a dog, you know. It's not a big deal. Dogs always do that. But we know that humans, because we have free will, then we have responsibility, right? Therefore they say, with great power comes great responsibility. You've heard that saying before?
From England, right?
Huh?
It was said by by an English philosopher.
Who? Do you remember who?
What's his name?
We can ask Siri.
Yes, I remember.
So, with great power comes great responsibility. So that means the judicial system has a philosophical, metaphysical belief of free will, right? And the same thing like democracy. America is a democratic country, so like you have different words like bureaucracy, plutocracy is actually what America is undercover. Plutocracy means ruled by the economic class. Because the irony of American democracy, English one is a little bit better, but it's still also a bit corrupt. But the American one, you only vote for people that you're aware of, right? And how are you aware of them? Based on how they're marketed, right? So the only way you can get knowledge about them is by how knowledge of them is being marketed to you, right? So whoever pays for that is the one who's choosing. Because you only believe what you understand, right? It's like the same thing in Corona, right? Some people like, no vaccine, some people like vaccine. We're not going to talk about that today, that's old news. But we can understand that people, they couldn't make an informed decision. So the more intelligent thing would be to be an agnostic, actually. To be like, I don't know if it's good or bad, because we have less than even 1 year of historical research of its efficacy, and for a vaccine, there's never been like that. So the best thing would be to be agnostic, because we don't know, there's not enough information to make a good decision. You can make probably the best decision, which government tried to do, like, okay, this is probably the best, but we don't have complete concrete proof if it's good or bad for health. So it was a decision which you have to make in the last second, right? So generally we can see that that's the nature of a lot of these kind of decisions. So democracy is another type of government where we believe that people are all equal and therefore they all have the right to choose, right? Although we know that actually we're only choosing based on what propaganda we've been given, but still we have independence to choose, we have independence to doubt this, doubt that, right? So that's because people are seen as equal, right? But empirically nobody's equal, right? Like, how much do you weigh? No way, I'm not trying to embarrass him, he looks quite skinny anyway, so. How much do you weigh?
Maybe 130 pounds.
130 pounds, so unfortunately I'm not American, I don't know what that is in kgs. But probably I weigh more than him, right? So in terms of weight, we're not equal, right? And then in terms of intelligence, probably he's much more intelligent than me in his SAT scores, his, what do you call it, GPA, right? GPA or something?
I doubt it.
Yeah. So we can see that even based on tests, chemistry, biology, mathematics, running, ability to do so many things, nobody's equal. Even twins are not equal. There are many commonalities, but equal means everything exactly the same, right? So what is the notion of being equal? It can't be an empirical thing, because empirically I can show how you're not equal to me. But if you want to take it as an absolute, as a principle of absolute reality, then we have to take it only as a metaphysical reality, right? Because physically we're all different. So that everyone accepts in the world, because that's just a fact you can observe. So then we have to see, okay, then the whole American government, the whole judicial system, all of these things, they're based on philosophical truths, and those philosophical truths are part of category of subset of philosophical knowledge called metaphysics. So in Greek, meta means beyond, and physics means those things which are what you call you can say experimental, by the senses, seeing, smelling, tasting, touching, hearing, the 5 primary senses. So those things, the empirical world does not hold those truths, because those truths are only metaphysically true. So therefore, America, they know just based on their dormant psychology that there is some metaphysical reality, right? Because even the whole government, the judicial system, so many things, we can give many examples of how we know that there is something which is deeper than only the physical. Is everyone with me so far? Does it make sense? Yeah? So in modern science, which was now their role is not as powerful as they used to be in terms of influencing philosophical thought, but in modern science, especially in the 20th century, there was a strong aversion to mixing any metaphysical or philosophical truths with what is called hard science. That's why you have the two terms, right? Hard science and soft science. So the funny thing is that nobody really gets taught this, because scientists, they do not study the philosophy of science. So because they don't study the philosophy of science, like if you study biology, you only study biology and that's it, right? But the problem is that knowledge in general must be understood via philosophy, not by an empirical or hard science, because hard science is only a subset of philosophy. So because they don't know the philosophy of science, then they try to say we only believe in things that we can experience by our senses, or we can do a test, a scientific test which can be falsified, which can be repeated, etc. to get the same result. But the issue with that is, if they say we don't accept anything as faith, then they're actually contradicting themselves. So how it doesn't seem like that doesn't make sense, right? I didn't like, what's this guy talking about? You know, somebody take the microphone. But now we will unpack what does that mean, and you all become shocked, unless you already know this. So within the philosophy of science, we understand that there are certain premises which cannot be proven. There are many. There are 4 principal ones. One of them, for example, is that if you do a test, you get the same result, right? But that is not a closed. Circuit. So there can be sometimes, especially in more deeper sciences, you get a different result. So we have the assumption in science that if you do A plus B, you always get C. But you can't prove that, because one day there may be something which disproves it, right? So there are 4 main assumptions, but one of them is that the world is real, right? That's an assumption of science, that everything you experience in the world is real. So the problem with that is, it's very difficult, actually it's impossible in terms of mainstream philosophy, to prove that there is a real world outside of your mind. So that is in philosophy, that is called solipsism. Has anyone heard of that before? So some of you have studied it, especially devotees, they know. So is there a real world outside of my mind? So the only way you can prove a real world outside of your mind is through something you experience via your mind, right? But the issue with that is that any evidence you use through the mind to say there's a real world outside of my mind, it will fall in category of fallacy, because that's what's called circular reasoning. So generally a lot of people, they get turned off by religious people because they also have a type of circular reasoning, which is that they say, someone comes up to you on the street, like sometimes we chant in, where was it, Times Square the other day? So they come up to you, they say, no, only this particular person is the only way, the truth and the life. Nobody else can come to God but through him, so you're all nonsense. And then you say, okay, but I just met you, so on what authority you're saying? And then they say, I'm saying on the authority of this particular book. And then you say, but there are so many books, so why is your book the truth? Because in the book, God says it's the truth. So then, how do you know that that's God? Because the book says it's God. But then how do you know the book is true? Because God says it's true in the book. So that's called a logical fallacy of circular reasoning. So that cannot be taken as a reason or a rational argument, because when you have an argument, especially deductive argument, then you have some A and B evidence, and that will create the C, right? But the problem is that you're using C as the evidence for A and B. So you're assuming that the conclusion is true before proving it's true. So therefore the same problem with solipsism, that if you want to prove that there is a real world outside of your mind, you can only do that through things you experience with the mind. Because it's impossible to experience this world in our current state without using our mind. Can anyone try to do it right now? Can anyone try? It's impossible, right? So therefore, even that, the whole principle of all knowledge in this world is on the principle of faith, that everything we're experiencing through the mind and senses is real. But we have experience that in this world we have 3 types of experience. So does anyone, although some of you already studied this, but those who haven't studied, you know who you are. What are the 3 states you experience? Please give me one each. Anyone can say? What is the state you're experiencing right now? Waking state. Okay, so that's one. Then there's another type of experience you have which is not when you're awake. What is it, lady at the back? Dreaming state, right? And then there's another state also which you experience, which is similar to dreaming, but you're not dreaming, it's something else. What's the name?
Deep sleep.
Deep sleep, right? So you experience these 3 states. So while you're in the dream state, everything appears real, right? But then when you wake up, it seems like it's not real. So how do you know that you're going to not wake up in 1 hour and be like, oh, it was just a dream? You don't, right? It's impossible to know. So therefore, you take that, what is called in Greek philosophy, or is also referred to in Vedic philosophy, that is called self-evident truth. So it's a truth which is rational, and although you can't prove it completely, but it's rational enough and it's practical to use. So even though you can't outright prove it, there's strong evidence that it's a truth. So therefore, I'm not going to prove it to you. It's self-evident that this world is real. So generally 99% of people accept that as a self-evident truth. Logically, philosophically, you can't prove it. It's impossible, because we're all using the mind to experience the world. But we take it as self-evident. Not only scientists, atheists, Christian, everyone accepts this principle. And then there is another issue, which is that spiritual but not religious, they will say, spiritual is nonsense, religious is nonsense, because we are only biological machines that have evolved over time, and consciousness is just an epiphenomenon of the brain, right? So generally we hear that. But nowadays, obviously, as we heard in the statistic, almost nobody in America believes that anymore, because they believe that I am spiritual but I'm not religious. So they know that there is something metaphysical. So that's more percentage say that than percentage say they're religious. Imagine. So they know there's something spiritual. Why? Because consciousness, it can't be just something material. Because in this world we have experiences of different types of matter, right? It's like here is wood. This is metal, hopefully. Hopefully it's not a plastic one. Otherwise it will break very quickly. And then here we have cloth. It's some kind of synthetic felt or something. No, this one is silk. This one is your seat. And then here we have leather, right? So we have so many things. In this phone we have all types of very difficult to get metals, which many Africans had to die to get in the mining camps. So very sad. So we can see that we're experiencing so many things, so many different types of elements, right? Can anyone name an element in the periodic table? Like in the periodic table?
Nitrogen.
Hydrogen. Anything else someone can say?
Iron.
Oxygen.
Iron. Fluoride.
Okay, then give me in the back, our boy in the back, he's a scientist. Give me 3, because he's very advanced scientist. Okay, good. So there are so many, right? So we're experiencing different forms of matter, and we're experiencing structures of matter, right? But then when we talk about structures of matter, what is the thing that is experiencing that? That's separate, right? Because you have matter and you have experiences of structures of matter. So we know that consciousness is separate because it has a superior faculty which matter doesn't have, which is that it's experiencing matter. So we see in science, they say, no, everything is only mechanistic, everything is only biological, we're all biological machines. But, so they say our ontology means our study of fundamental things which cannot be reduced, right? Like this, you can reduce it into, like the paint maybe is made out of hydrogen and carbon, especially plastic is hydrocarbons. Then you have maybe titanium, iron, I don't know, different elements you have there. So you can keep breaking it down, right? Then you break it down into protons, neutrons, electrons, right? Which, by the way, you can't actually directly experience also. That's like a theory also. And then beyond that, you have even more subtle things like bosons, right? So you keep going more and more subtle. And then science will say that everything is only the mechanistic, physical, biological world. But when you keep reducing it, actually, they also don't have that ontology, that you only have empirical thing. They have another ontology, which is that you have a category of energy, right? So although they say we only empiricists, but they actually have another side, which is the ontology of the energy. So we know that in science there are different laws. So one is called the law of entropy. Does anyone know what the law of entropy is? Anybody know? What does it mean?
It's a constant state of decay and chaos.
Exactly. So everything deteriorates over time, right? Everything is becoming, just like there was a Big Bang explosion and now everything is deteriorating again, becoming chaos. So that's called the law of entropy, but there is another law which is called the law of conservation of energy, right?
Right.
So in the law of conservation of energy, energy cannot be created nor destroyed. That's what energy means, right? Like this can be created and destroyed. It was created and everyone knows 100% is going to be destroyed. Whether it's in 10 years when we throw it away, or in millions of years when it decays, when humans have gone extinct because we're doing all nonsense things. Everything we know, all structures of matter are going to change. That's guaranteed. Although we're not going to be there to experience it, we can see that that's the law of material nature, right? So we know that there are 2 categories. Energy is in a category called something which is never created nor destroyed. But you know what is funny? that's the same ontology exactly what Krishna gives in the Gita for the soul. Which there Krishna says that nasate vidyate bhavo, nice verse he gives. So he literally gives the exact same thing as the law of conservation of energy but in Sanskrit. And that is where he puts the category of the soul. So that's why Gita, all of you should read, it's very important. Describes all of these things. So we can easily say, okay, it's the most rational thing would be to put consciousness in that category. Because then it gives us access to higher truths. So that is the main point of this, that what is spiritual? Spiritual means it includes some platform of metaphysics, it includes some deeper notion of just things which you experience with the senses. So now, let's go into the next one. And another argument, why consciousness is metaphysical, why it's spiritual? Because in Sanskrit and also in English you have the law of causal relationships, right? So you have the notion that everything what's present in the effect, it's present in the cause. It may not be in the same form, but it's present in the cause, right? So in Sanskrit that's called Sat Karyavad. Sat Karyavad means, Sat means spiritual, Karya means the created, and Vada means like theory or notion, concept. So in that concept it's explained that just like when you see the harmonium, so everything which is the harmonium is made out of was present in the cause. So there is wood, there is metal, there is plastic, and that's pretty much it, I think. There's three things, metal. So everything which the harmonium was created with was present in the cause. So in the same way, whatever, when we intellectually want to study the world in an intelligent way, then we have to study the science of causal relationships, right? So therefore, if we see that consciousness has a unique role, then therefore consciousness must also be present in the cause. If we deny that, then we're denying free will, we're denying love, we're denying that our opinion has any value, because on the ultimate platform it doesn't have, because we'll only be mechanistic, right? But nobody wants to say that, right? And then imagine the irony that you argue that no, we don't have free will. So why are you using your free will to argue? If you don't have free will, no point trying to convince me. Because free will has no value anyway. So it's only a dream anyway, there's no free will, right? So people use their free will to argue they don't have free will. So therefore, sometimes it's said, our teachers, they say that sometimes atheism and also people who reject the notion of free will, they're basically philosophically trying to self-destruct. They're philosophically trying to lessen the value of themselves. So he explains that that is not a philosophical argument, that's a psychological issue, not a philosophical argument. It's a psychological issue. So that actually makes more sense, right? That what is the cause that you're trying to reject that I have any free will, that I'm spiritual, that I'm eternal? That's because you have a psychological problem. So if you have a problem, no problem, we'll help you with that too. But a different type of help. So Sat Karyavad is very important, that whatever is present in the effect comes from the cause. So therefore, the cause of everything has to be conscious, because there's no other explanation of where consciousness comes from. So that's why people, they say they're spiritual. Deep down, they know all of these truths inherently. Even the American judicial system, even the government, they know this deep down. The Coins, they know this. So the next point is that, okay, so people like to be spiritual, but they don't like... what time finishing, by the way?
We can go to 7:35, maybe ask questions for 10 more minutes after that.
So the next point is, okay, we know what is spiritual, that people understand that I'm metaphysical, I'm a soul, I'm a little bit something deeper, but then why is there aversion to the concept of religion? So first half we understood, now second half we have to think. So what does it mean, religion? So there are different understandings of the word religion. So spiritual, we linked it to metaphysical. We're taking that as a synonym for this discussion today. So now we have to draw the distinction between spiritual and religious, right? So there are different points, but the first point we have to do is study what does the word religion mean, because it's an interesting word, right? Just like there's a very strong Christian apologist called David Bentley Hart. So he studied the notion of, because notion of religion comes from English, the word religion comes from Latin. Latin is strongly linked with Christianity, especially the Western Christian Church, coming from Italy. So the notion of religion in Latin, all Latin is very similar to Sanskrit. The roots are very similar to Sanskrit. So in Latin, everything has an etymological derivation. In English, not always, because English is kind of a jumbled up language due to colonial reasons. But There's two general interpretations. So one is re ligare, like re, everyone knows, like to reproduce. So re means again, right? So ligare means like in your body you have a ligament, right? So ligament is connecting two parts of the body, right? And you have the similar word in Sanskrit called yoga. So the word yoga, generally we think like I'm going to do kurmasana, matsyasana, right? Some different asanas, pigeon pose, bridge pose. But yoga literally means, it comes from the Sanskrit word yuj, which means to plus or to join or to connect. So one meaning of religion etymologically is that re ligare, to reconnect. So that's actually, we can accept that. Even spiritual people, okay, I'm reconnecting with my spiritual nature. But then, if they say that, then spiritual and reconnecting is not such a big problem. Another one, they say, some people say it comes from the word regla. Like, does anyone speak Spanish here? Or Italian, French? So what does it mean, regla?
Regla, por lo general, we generally use the word regla as in a rule.
Rule.
Or when you're measuring something, you have, the measuring stick.
A ruler, right?
Yeah. A ruler, correct.
Yeah. So regla means like a rule, right? So that means to follow the rules, like rules of a religion or an institution, rules of God, rules of a holy book, Bible, Quran, Torah, different things. So that's another meaning which they take as a derivation, like scholars. So David Bentley Hart, he's one of the most powerful Christian theologians. He says that religion, after the certain point in Christian history, came to mean a certain closed community who ascribe allegiance and adherence to a certain set of religious dogmas, beliefs, and they accept an ecclesiastical community. In other words, a type of church, priests, sacerdotes, we say in Spanish. So certain religious institutional figures, right? So that was what it became to mean. But originally, religion was a type of virtue, a type of piety. So that's how Prabhupada generally used sometimes the word religiosity, right? So just like honesty, kindness, so religion was another type of virtue, which means that I have gratefulness to something higher. I have a sense that I want to offer something to something higher out of gratefulness, appreciation, right? Therefore, one of my gurus, he gives a funny explanation. What does gratefulness mean? He says, gratefulness means that I'm thankful for something great. So actually, the funny thing is, in sociology, they say that certain qualities like gratefulness, they are very important in developing a sense of quality of life and happiness, having great gratitude. Because without gratitude, you can have so many nice things, but you won't appreciate them, right? But why do we look for things? Because we'll be grateful when we get them. But if we get them and we're ungrateful, then we're not going to be happy with them, right? So one meaning also of religion is that it's a virtue. So that also, the New Age community, they don't reject that. But the one they reject is when it becomes a closed-minded, closed system of religious institution and certain rules and only a certain book. So therefore our teacher, Prabhupada, he says that religion without philosophy is, you remember? It's called?
Cheating.
Huh?
No,
Not that code, but they're not. Sentimentalism.
Or
Right?
sometimes
It is also cheating, yeah.
Yeah.
Religion without philosophy is sentiment, sometimes fanaticism.
Yes, so it can either be one sense, which is sentimentalism, or the other extreme, like far left, far right, kind of like that. So the other extreme is that it becomes fanaticism, right? And then he says that philosophy without religion is
Speculation.
mental speculation, right? So we can see that. So that something I like to share, that there was a very great teacher called Socrates in Greece. So any of you heard of him? Yeah? So most of you, if anyone read these kind of spiritual things, everyone knows about him. So the Greek philosophers were the ones that started the revolution of knowledge in Western culture, European culture. So we should have some, general knowledge about them. So in a place called Delphi, there was an oracle. Like an oracle is like a medium which channels the gods. That time they say the gods. So he's channeling some higher knowledge to give to the humans. So his friend went to this oracle in Delphi and he asked that who is the most intelligent person in Greece? Because at that time there were many great intellectuals. What we call in Sanskrit Gyanis. Actually the word Gyani and Gnosis is basically the same word in Sanskrit and Greek. So they were called Gyanis, or very great intellectuals, philosophers, scholars. So they said that the most intelligent person is Socrates. So then when he found this out, he rejected. He said, I'm not the most intelligent. You're crazy. Huh? He's like, I don't know anything. Even though the whole youth community at that time, they were following him very strongly, and that's why people were threatened by him, because he has so much power and influence. But he says, I don't know anything. I don't know what you're talking about. So he went around the community, so he went to interview different people that he thought knew more than him. So he went to some scientists, he went to some different people doing metallurgy, he went to some people that were very expert in military knowledge, he went to some people that were great in political knowledge, and he saw many of them, they had a lot of knowledge, and in that particular category, they had more knowledge than him. So he was thinking, I'm not the most intelligent, I don't know what this oracle says, but at the same time, he doesn't want to reject, because the oracle is giving direct knowledge from the divine. So he was like, what should I do? And then after studying them, he saw that all of these people, they think they know a lot. So they have some level of pride. They think they know more outside of what their expertise is. So he saw that a lot of them had a lot of pride. So a lot of them, they were thinking that I know more than I know. But he says, now I understand. The oracle selected me because I'm the only one who knows that I know nothing. Everyone else thinks they know everything. So this is a big thing which was lacking in the concept of religion, which is what put off the New Age people, that there was too much pride, there was too much hunger for power, and there was too much sectarianism, not humility. So as you know, religion should be a virtue. Even early Christianity took the word as a virtue, but later, because of power and control, then religion had a lot of negative effects on society. So one of my teachers, he explains that, this is a very nice analogy which he gave. He studied at Harvard, but he's also a devotee. So he says that the Western world is afflicted by something called PTSD of religion. So everyone knows what that acronym means?
Post-traumatic stress.
Yeah?
Isn't it like post-traumatic stress or something?
Yeah, exactly. Post-traumatic stress disorder. So for instance, we have many, what do you call them in America? They go to or they come back? Veterans. So we have many veterans, right? But the big issue with veterans is that when they come back, they're never the same, because they have post-traumatic stress disorder from the war, because it's such a extreme, intense, crazy environment that they're experiencing, that they're not the same, and they have so many issues, so many bad dreams, emotional, it's very difficult for them. So they have to go through a lot of counseling, so many things, just to feel like normal again. It's very difficult. That's why they have a lot of respect for veterans, because they sacrifice so much, and they come back, but they're not the same. They're so hurt inside, physically, emotionally, psychologically. So he said, just like in war you have PTSD, he said Europe and Western culture has a PTSD of religion.
Absolutely.
Because when you study the history of religion, even now a little bit in the Middle East, but I mean that's been going on since time immemorial, but at least in Europe, when you study the history of religion, especially Christianity becoming around 150 AD become very big in the Roman Empire, and then later on it spread everywhere, and then some few countries were really hesitating, like Lithuania, other places. Finally everyone became Christian, but it wasn't always in the nicest way. And then later on, first you had Orthodox Christianity, now we call it that, but you had the normal church, which was more East and West, then it split, and then you had Catholicism, then that split later on by a German man. They became Protestantism. So then so many splits came, and then not only they were fighting people who did not want to accept the only religion, but then they were fighting between each other. So he says that when you study the history of religion, it looks bad, right? Yeah. But he says, don't worry, when you study it, it's actually worse than you think. Generally we say, when you study, it's not as bad as you think, right? But he says, it looks bad, but when you really study it, it's actually worse than you think. So because of that, a lot of people became switched off. And for some time, they were completely like, I don't want anything to do with religion. So PTSD has some elements such as withdrawal. So we tend to withdraw, like I don't want to, and also hypervigilance, right? So we can see when we look at general sociology, including in America, that was there. But now people are starting to wake up again, especially millennials, and what's the new one? Gen Z, right? And then what's the one after that?
Gen Alpha.
Yeah? Gen Alpha.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have so many generations who are becoming more spiritual but not religious. So therefore, we understand that, okay, there is some PTSD of religion because of misapplication of religion and institutionalization of religion and politics taking over religion, right? It's a big topic, but we can just say generally. So then we have to say, okay, so what is the solution that if I'm spiritual but not religious, how do I avoid going the other extreme? First it became fanaticism, but now another danger is sentimentalism, right? So how do we avoid the other extreme? Because there are some good points about spiritual but not religious, but there are also some bad points. So one of the bad points is that there is a very strong philosophical relativism. Everyone familiar with that word, relativism? That there is no absolute truth. But the danger with relativism is, just like if you say there is no absolute truth, then all devotees, they know this because we study nicely, but what is the logical fallacy of saying there is no absolute truth?
You absolutely should.
That's you're claiming an absolute truth, right? By saying that. If you say there is no absolute truth, then you're contradicting yourself because that would be an absolute truth. And then you say, okay, there's no absolute truth except this one, then you're doing error number 2, which New Age people, spiritual or religious, first thing they don't like is don't say there's anything, is only one truth, because it's dangerous. So there's no absolute truth. But then as soon as you say that, you're saying there's only one truth which is absolute, you're taking yourself as an absolute authority. So then not only you're saying there's no absolute truth, there's no absolute authority, then you're contradicting both of them, not only one but both. So it's very dangerous. So we can see it's logically impossible to have some scope of absolute truth and some scope of absolute authority. So then the point comes that even I want to avoid it, I can't avoid it. So if you're humble, just like Socrates, who was the greatest intellectual of Western history, Western culture, in one sense, according to the Oracle at least. Some people will say someone else, like Richard Dawkins, they will say Bentley Hart, whoever they want to say. But we can say Socrates, one of the biggest ones. So he had humility, that I am not the absolute truth, the arbiter of absolute truth. So if you want to say there's no absolute truth, you're becoming an absolute authority and making an absolute statement. So therefore you're basically saying I'm the best. So you're basically in one sense saying I'm God, right? That you have the perfect knowledge. So that's very dangerous. So this relativism is good as a social policy, but it's not good as a philosophical policy. So philosophically we know that there must be some type of absolute truth, because otherwise love, equality, so many of these metaphysical values, they don't have value if they're relative, right? They have to be absolutely true. Just like everyone is equal, it has to be absolutely true. Otherwise we don't value that so much. So therefore, what is the most rational way to understand how to become spiritual, but I want to avoid the negative elements of religion? The most absolute way is to follow a spiritual science, right? Very simple, right? I don't want to follow blind faith. I don't want to follow a fanatic thing. I don't want to follow a sentimental thing. I want to follow a spiritual science, because then, just like we accept science, technology, why? Because we can experience the benefits, the results. So that's why people are more interested generally to study applied sciences than the theoretical ones, right? You see, especially general society. Maybe not some abstract individuals who are PhD in maths, they're extra special intelligence. But most of us, we're not clever enough to do that, but we like the applied sciences, right? Just like I studied IT. So then, okay, we want to understand that there is a spiritual science. So what is the way to experience a spiritual science? So some people, they say that I don't mind believing in God. If you say Krishna is God, I don't mind. But they say, can you prove it? So then it becomes difficult, because first you have to understand what is the nature of proof. When you're asking for a metaphysical truth, but you're only saying, can you prove it from a empirical method of testing, then you're contradicting yourself, right? You're like saying, I want to measure the heat of your body, but I don't want to use a thermometer. I'm only going to use a microphone to test the volume of sound, how many decibels. But you can't use a sound measuring device to measure heat, right? It's not appropriate, right? So in the same way, we know that metaphysical truths, they have to be proven with a metaphysical process. So physical process or empirical process means that we can prove things within the controlled experiment paradigm, right? Things which can be studied, you can make some observation, testing, experiment on them, right? If you cannot study something, then how are you going to test it, right? Like if I want to get a mouse and study its insides, like they do in the lab, if it runs away, how am I going to study it, right? So first you have to be able to have a controlled experiment where it's there to be studied. But the problem is that as soon as you say God can be studied by a controlled experiment, then you're contradicting the notion of God, right? Because God cannot be studied in a controlled experiment, because something which can be controlled is something inferior, and if something is inferior, it's not God, because then I'm superior to it, so I would be God, right? So therefore, when you want to study something superior, then you can only do it when that thing gives some access to you, right? That's like even in the general world, if you want to approach the president, can you go up to him? It's not easy, right? But if you do something which will attract the president, just like in England we have a nice Hare Krishna temple, so it's big enough, our temple, that you can meet the Prime Minister. You just wait in the temple and he will come once a year. Because when they want to get votes, they want to get the Hare Krishna vote, or what we call in wrong terminology, Hindu vote, right? So in England that's about maybe 1 point something million people. So that's a lot of people. And they're also very rich, like minority. So they want their votes. So they always come. So they say, you have to act in a way that they want to give their knowledge to you, give their experience to you, right? So in the same way, if we want to approach God, which is He is by definition superior, beyond our control, then we cannot approach Him by trying to control and put in a fish in there, right? You have to approach by doing something that will attract the attention. So therefore, here what we're saying is, we're not saying that you have to believe Hare Krishna, have blind faith. We're not saying that everything here you have to believe or you're going to hell, something like that. Generally you hear that a lot, right? That's why a lot of people are spiritual but not religious, because of that type of words that people use. But what we're saying here is that, is there a way to develop pure love? Is there a way to develop happiness? Is there a way to develop peace? Yes, that is when one understands relationship with something supreme, which is God or Krishna, right? So therefore, we're not saying here, just believe, but we're saying that if you're coming here and we're giving a good, rational explanation why you should check, then you should check. We're not saying to believe, we're saying why don't you check? Because if you don't do the test, then how will you get the result? And we can see that everyone here, at least we did the test, we got some experience. So the principle here tonight is that, what is the way of checking? The way of checking is hearing the knowledge which is given. Just like we take things as self-evident because they have some value, right? Self-evident truths. So science knows that there is value in studying this world because we can improve quality of life. Therefore it's self-evident that the world is real. So in the same way, we're not saying you have to believe in the Vedas or this will happen to you. No, we're saying read the Vedic knowledge, and then when you understand it, it will automatically prove itself to you, because it's self-evident knowledge. It's not a sectarian, fanatic knowledge, that only this truth is good and only that one is bad. No, truth is a virtue, knowledge is a virtue. So having knowledge can be anywhere, but we're saying that if you have a systematic, in-depth presentation of knowledge, and you're looking to become more spiritual, and if you don't want to try to act like I'm the absolute authority, you want to become humble, to actually become knowledgeable, then why don't you check? Why don't you do the test? So that is our proposal. So thank you. Most of you have been here at least once, so our encouragement is to keep coming, to take this process very seriously. They say in life, anything of success does not come by comfort. This is another issue with the spiritual but not religious, that people like to do everything that feels good. I like to do psychedelics, it feels good, right? I like to do some sound bowl bath, feels good. But you have to also test the result. So we say that you make the experiment, you do the test. So you take the japa beads, most of you have, some of you don't have, they will give you. You make the experiment every day. I will chant a little bit this mantra and have some experience. Every day for 1 month, I will make a test that even though I love to go to McDonald's to have the, what's it called, happy burger, happy meal? Happy meal. For 1 month, I will try to not eat any meat and any fish and any egg. And I will try this, what they call Hare Krishna diet. And we say, make that experiment, that you study this knowledge. You take a small book home, give it a read. See if it unlocks the truth which is already inside of you. And then not only that, we say, come and dance and chant. This is the topmost spiritual science, chanting and dancing. So you chant the names of Krishna, you chant the mantra, And if you chant with your heart, with love, then have the experience. And then we don't need to convince you, you'll convince yourself because you experience something valuable inside. So thank you very much. If there's any quick question, comment, protest, anything you want to discuss, and you can share now. Yes, my friend.
Yeah, it was very touching what you said about people wanting proof. That to me, from what I heard and what I understood, is kind of like people that do want proof. The reason it's almost impossible to, as you described, it's kind of like, you know, in mathematics there's this thing called infinity. Imagine you try to take infinity and try to fit it into the finite. It just doesn't make sense. Right? So you have to experience it, and it's a forever ride.
Yeah. Oh, beautiful. Thank you. Very nice. So just in case any of you are wondering, this is part 1. Part 2 is on Tuesday. So that one will, now we've unpacked what is spiritual, not religious, people that reject metaphysical or spiritual ideas, reality. And the next one we're going to be discussing on Tuesday is part 2, which will be discussing now. We want a spiritual science, so we'll go a little bit deeper into how can I understand and choose a spiritual science, or what is a spiritual science, and what is the next step. So we're going to go even deeper on Tuesday. So I think there's no more questions?
Questions?
Oh, there is. Okay.
Thank you for the wonderful class. I really like, this was a, for me personally, I think, especially talking to newer devotees or talking to a lot of my friends, I feel like this is a very relevant topic. I've heard so many people say that that they're inclined to believe that there's something metaphysical, but they don't necessarily want to partake in anything because of negative acclamations in the environment, like what you mentioned. I have a question about, similar to this point, about sort of the prove it attitude that someone may have.
Which attitude?
The sort of prove it attitude.
Prove it, yeah.
Right? If someone has, like, in order to develop Krishna consciousness, you need some level of faith, right? As you were mentioning, you got to take up the experiment. You got to, at least, today I'll start with 1 round, or today I'll, eat Hare Krishna Prasadam. But, like, to someone who has this prove it attitude, they need some sort of an inclination in order to start, in order to have faith, they need to have some sort of thing that can, lead to having this faith, right? Like it's sort of like this weird feedback loop where, like, if you have faith, you will get something. But if someone doesn't have faith, then the communication with Krishna is difficult. So how can someone who doesn't necessarily have faith, how can they develop faith? Is that question clear?
Yes, good question, yeah. So there are many stages, because just like, for instance, if somebody says that in the microscope, I studied one petri dish and I saw a specific type of bacteria under the microscope, and they say to you, I don't believe you, you're making it up, that bacteria can't be there, that bacteria has been extinct for thousands of years. How is it there? Under your microscope you can see it. So then you have to tell him that you have to check. But he says, I don't know how to check, I never studied science. I don't know what to look for even. So then you have to study, right? You have to study biology, you have to understand about so many elements, so many things. And then after many years of study, you can become qualified to do the test to check, right? So in the same way, just like in science, if you want to check any higher truths, just like they say that those who are studying the more gross levels of science, the more kind of upper level of the more physical part of physics and biology, there's more chance of atheism. But those who study more deeper, like quantum level of science, generally they start to become more into spiritual things again, because it's not so black and white. So even in science, the more advanced topics require many years of study, and it's impossible to prove it to a layman, right? Everyone knows. So in the same way, to understand deeper spiritual truths, you have to have some level of study before that. So it becomes a rational step-by-step development of knowledge, and then you have some basic knowledge, and then based on the premise of knowledge, you make another level of knowledge, and you keep going up. It's like you're building a foundation on a house, right? So in the same way, in the spiritual science, we have to start with some very basic information. What are the virtues of practicing life, spiritual life? What are the benefits on the people? Then you can study, okay, what is the difference between physical and metaphysical? Then you understand what is consciousness. Then you understand what is the state of consciousness. This is exactly what Krishna does in the Gita. In chapter 2, he doesn't say you have to love God and surrender to God, right? Because it's dogmatic to say that. He doesn't say it till the very end of the book. Like very last part of the book, he says, Sarva Dharman Paritaja, right? But beginning, he's just saying that I'm going to give you some basics of who are you? Because who are you is much more easy to understand than who is God, right? What is consciousness? Why is my body changing? Why am I suffering? And then based on that, you get a little bit more faith, then you keep building up. Then reincarnation, then karma, what are the three modes? Then gradually you go deeper into theology. So just like in science, you don't start with the hard, advanced topics, you start with the basic and build up. In the same way you do that in the spiritual experiment, the spiritual test.
You have the different stages of bhakti. The first one is called Shraddha. And usually the word is, people say faith, but it's often translated in a less committed way, like interest, curiosity, inquisitiveness, like a willingness to check it out, participate, I like this.
Attraction.
Versus like, I believe, or I'm interested in this, and then by the practice, then it leads more towards nishta, like a firm conviction of it. So it doesn't start with this firm conviction. It's more of it. That's a byproduct that comes later on.
Very nice.
That's really.
And there's another point I wanted to share, which is that for me, I never looked for. For me, I was never like I will only take up some spiritual path or have some faith in God when there's proof of God. But for me, I didn't need proof of God. I just needed proof of somebody who is directly connected to God. And when I saw Prabhupada, then I said, I don't know if God exists or not, but because Prabhupada exists, for me that's proof God exists. So you can see, just like people met Jesus, right? So because people met Jesus or Buddha or Muhammad, so many great saints and sages, some people say about Haile Selassie, I'm not sure about that actually. My grandmother knew him. So that's another topic. But generally the saints and sages, they're actually a type of proof of the existence of God. Just like people are like, has anyone heard of a country called, let me think of it really, South Georgia and the Sandwich Islands? Actually, I think that's part of the UK. Anyway, has anyone heard of that island? So it's one of the most remote islands in the middle of the sea. It's one of the remote places in the world. So most of you, if someone says, where are you from? And you'll be like, oh, I'm from South Georgia. And they'll be like, oh, you're from Georgia? Like, which city? And they're like, no, I'm from the island in the middle of the sea, South Georgia. They'll be like, I don't believe you. What are you on about? But if you show some evidence from there, like the passport or the ambassador comes, then you're like, okay, maybe I believe now, right? So in the same way, that to approach God is not easy, but God, either he comes at certain points in history, or according to Gita, or you can meet the representative of God. So in the Vedic system, there is not like there is a saint who existed millions of years ago or 500 years ago. But if God is present, omnipresent, and God is not alone, then also pure devotees of God are present. So one of the strongest evidence for God is to meet a pure devotee of God. That's why there are so many Christians. It's not because of the church, it's because of Jesus. Although that's another topic, Trinitarianism, but we can say the basic principle that if you meet somebody who is carrying God with them and is carrying the compassion and the love of God, then automatically you become convinced. Automatically. That makes sense. But it's a big topic. So I think that's it now for time.
No, you can keep one more
Oh,
question.
I was just like kind of going based off like where does faith come from or how to build faith. Something that just came to mind was kind of some things we've touched on, but willingness to be uncomfortable, I feel is like a huge start within it. I think that like openness to be uncomfortable and accept that you don't know is how you learn. And I feel like approaching anything new, like even in terms outside of spirituality, if you're learning about a new topic, or there's always this hesitation because it's something you've never done before within anything you try that is new. And I think being uncomfortable like allowing yourself to be uncomfortable, to be open to learn is really how you kind of build faith. But yeah, and I think that there was another point I wanted to go off, but my mind was kind of going here and there. But yeah, just a willingness to be uncomfortable, and also just like you were also saying, within knowing yourself, I think before you can, you know, really have this openness to Krishna is to know yourself. And, you know, for my experiences, you know, me being uncomfortable through many life experiences is how I've known myself and how I've like grown that faith. But I think it's a very personal experience with each person's journey, and no matter how much one person is to be like trying to share this information or what faith is to another person, it really comes down to them having that openness to like have it for themselves. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Sandipani, for speaking here at Brooklyn Temple. So we can ask if Sandipani can, we can all stand up. You can give us another kirtan.
We'll do experiment now.
Yeah. You ever done this? Yes.